Hi, my name is Daria Mezentova and welcome to Politeka World Show. In today's show, we'll talk about the following. New sanctions starting to bite Russia's economy as Moscow admits deficit impact. How strong can be the feeling of the pinch? War of attrition for Russia. Was Russia ready for such sanctions as have been imposed to? Migration effect for Russia. How Ukraine can win from it. Oil embargo. How it will change the global oil market. We will talk about it with our expert. Today with us, the chair of economics of the University of Wyoming, Aleksandre Skiba. Aleksandre, I'm happy to have you here.
I'm very happy to talk to you and to provide my insight for your listeners.
Oh, it's good about insights. So I really appreciate to hear them today. So let's start from the thing that my point of view is like that. So undoubtedly, Russia becomes much poorer every day, and we could see it. But besides that, we don't have such sanctions and so on, the decisions by international governments that could kill Russian economy. So how do you feel? What now should do US, Europe, and what is the receipt?
So I think, so thank you for the question. I think that the bottom line that we see right now is that the sanctions are beginning to work, because the sanctions, this is not a time to let up on any of the sanctions, because we're just now are seeing these sanctions beginning to bite. Because one of the things we saw that after the full-scale invasion, there were expectations that Russian economy is just going to completely collapse, and it didn't, right? We saw a big devaluation of ruble, but then it stabilized.
Yes.
And the reason for that is very simple. The Russian government took on a lot of very draconian measures that most developed economies never take to that extreme. Like, for example, foreigners said that we don't want to invest in Russia. We want to sell our holdings. Now, if you sell holdings, which basically means that you have a stocks or equities in Russian corporation or just interests, and if you sell it to Russians to take the dollars and invest them somewhere, what you're doing, you would be contributing to the flight of dollars, and the ruble would collapse. So what does Russia do? Russia says, well, you know what? You can't sell it. So, so of course that stabilizes the flight, right? That stabilizes the exchange market in the short run, but it doesn't fix the fundamental problem that foreigners do not trust Russia. They don't want to invest in Russia. They don't want to, continue the foreign direct investments. They don't want to hold stocks for a variety of reasons. Of course, when you analyze, like, for example, stock market, there's always trade-offs between risks and returns. There are always people who want to take on ridiculous risks in order to get some returns, but those are more of a gambling type of investments that, completely different from what we're talking about here. So anyway, so Russia stabilizes the economy by making these draconian measures of, you cannot sell, you have to convert all of the rubles. Then the Russian central bank begins to interfere to prop up the dollar. At the same time, they got lucky because the oil prices went up and the gas prices went up. When that happened, then partially because of the quick economic recovery, when that happened, now they were getting dollars and euros that they could use to prop up their dollar. And so then, but at the same time, the bad things were happening. They were able to cover it a little bit, but the bad things, the bad dynamics was still happening, and it was not a temporary dynamic. These are permanent things. So to answer your question, sanctions are beginning to work, and we need to keep them, and if anything,
on the track. Yeah, but still, what I heard from the experts I had interview with, they told me that sanctions, they have a big influence on the citizens, on Russian citizens, and but on the other hand, they don't influence, especially Putin, the officials near Putin, and the best thing, what is important for Ukraine, is the availability to finance this war. Yes, so it is manageable now for Putin, for Russia to fix all the problems and finance this war. So. And it takes time. You told sanctions started to work, but it takes time for it to work. But we need it now because our people died, Ukrainians died, our infrastructure is struggling, and so on, so on, so on. So how we could make this process like more quicker?
I think what the West is doing now is probably on the right track in terms of um, targeting specifically oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
I think to me this is the key focus to make these changes quicker, because you're exactly right. This is a brutal invasion with tremendous cost of innocent people across Ukraine that needs to stop. And I think that the most effective ones are the sanctions targeting the energy sector. The reason for that is that Russia, they essentially wasted 30 years of where they could have spent enormous oil revenues to modernize their economy, and they didn't. There, other than few examples that everybody keeps reusing, oh look, we invented this or we did this. Other than that, there's really nothing for Russia to show over 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're heavily dependent on oil prices. Even their finance minister recently, when he was talking about the sanctions finally biting, it was all in relation to the oil revenue and gas revenue. The reason, so the effects are very likely to accelerate, and here's why. This is just my opinion, by the way. I don't, a lot of information
Mm-hmm.
coming,
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to get. If I wanted to learn something about the U.S. economy, very easy to get. Russia, it's very difficult to get. You don't know if you can trust the official inflation numbers, the official balance number, budget deficit numbers. All of that is a little murky, and it's adding to the problem, by the way. So the only thing that we can go by is this ruble to dollar or ruble to euro exchange rate, because that's one thing that Russia can't hide, because they're getting dollars from the foreign countries. They translating them into rubles because they need to make payment in rubles
Yeah.
for the expenditure. So this is where, like, this is a tiny little glimpse that we have to try to understand what's actually happening. And the devaluation of the ruble is consistent with the fact that they're running out of money to prop that ruble. Of course, what that's going to do, that's probably going to put pressure on the consumer prices again, and further, increase inflation. The flip side of the cheap ruble is that, so Russians, everything is more expensive for the Russians, but now for the same dollar price of oil, they are getting more rubles that they can spend on domestic, expenditures and things like that. So basically, that devaluation of ruble is informative, but with a lot of these, you kind of have to think about both sides, as a buyer and as a seller, somebody who needs rubles or somebody who wants to sell the rubles or use rubles to buy something inside of Russia or outside. And so so the reason I'm saying that I think that these the sanctions in the energy sector are beginning to bite, and I think that's why it's so important to keep them in place, is because Europe wasn't waiting since February 24th. There was a big awakening. I wish it happened, 8 years ago, but it happened now. It was a big awakening of just looking at their energy portfolio and saying, look, we are being, we gave up a portion of our decision making to this dictator who, pretended to play nice, but never actually. We knew in Ukraine, we knew or suspected that he never was going to play nice and invade and use weapons and start a brutal invasion. I mean, we had those fears, and then when that actually happened, now all of a sudden, there was this big awakening, and then started changing. Like, for example, liquid natural gas terminals started popping up. Now there are floating ones that would go to a country and fill up their reserves of liquid natural gas. Oil. Now there are differences. Now there's more capacity to get oil from other places other than Russia. All of that is taking place. And that's why some of these sanctions in oil and gas, they didn't have an immediate impact, because Europe could not just switch off and say, we're not going to buy your oil. Even though a lot of them, moved away, like, United States moved away. They're not buying that much.
But still, Russia can afford the expenses, and they started to spend more than 20% in 2022. Yes, mostly because of the defense sphere. So we know that they could afford it, and even Putin announced that there is no limits for them and expenses for military sphere. So if the sanctions started to work, so how it could be reflected on the military sphere they finance?
I think the big thing that's that commitment by Russian government to keep spending on the military. What that means that they're basically saying, we're getting this big piece of pie, and we're gonna put this much into the military. When that pie is shrinking, there's going to be less and less going towards other parts of the economy. So now we can easily see changes, or reduction in investment in infrastructure, reduction in investment in schooling, higher education, social programs, safety. All of that stuff is going to start going down. Medicaid, healthcare, all of that stuff will start going down just to feed this war machine that financing our
from one basket to another basket. Yes. So what I heard from the economists. So, but from them, for them, it's okay to do it because they have this baggage of income. So, okay, let's continue to talk about energy sphere. So, for example, they, for now, what I heard, maybe you have another information. So, from the sanctions and embargo on oil and gas, they lost around 48% right now. So compared with 2022. So how critical is this slump, and how this slump could be increased?
So first of all, the sum, the floor, the price floor that, or the price ceiling, I guess price ceiling that Europeans have imposed. The Europeans, and actually not just Europeans, the world essentially has imposed on Russian oil, is gonna bite. Russia comes back and starts saying, you hear some things that they're sort of saying, we're not gonna be selling oil. Kind of a weird threat. It's basically saying that, we're not collecting the revenue, so we're gonna collect even less. Like, I think it's an empty threat to me. But again, there could be something that's going on that's not on the surface. That let's put it this way: if they want to reduce the quantity, let them. So in other words, one thing you have to remember is that the world, or their demand for their oil is coming. A lot of it is coming from India and China, and that's something that should be probably would be the next level of pressure, to have the world be truly united, the big economies be truly united. The interesting thing is that, China, the way they handled COVID wasn't necessarily, in retrospect, wasn't necessarily the best policy. So now they're going through this massive surge in cases of COVID. What that does, that reduces the demand for all things, including energy. United States and Europe are going through some high inflation, which, by the way, some of it has to do with the war, some of it doesn't. So we basically have a general slowing down of the recovery from COVID. And because oil is a truly globally traded commodity, the reduction in demand will push the prices further down. So in other words, if what we see now, because the oil prices now are low,
Yeah.
the Urals is trading at half of what it was trading in March. The
Mhm.
Russian price is at half. It's actually below the 60 ruble, the $60 limit. I think it's like at 55 or something that I checked as of today. And so so I think the slowing down of the economy, in right now is doing the job of the sanctions, because China, the demand is low. India, the demand is not as fast growing as fast as it could, and there are limits to the capacity of oil storage. So oil cannot be, if you just just making oil without having the ability to store doesn't make sense. And that's why, for example, we had negative oil prices during the COVID recession, just
Mhm.
because this storage constraint, people were willing to give up oil and pay you to take care of it, makes no sense. Remember, like, do you realize negative price of oil? I mean, it wasn't an abnormality, but it did happen. So that pointed out to the importance of storage facilities. So now, China is buying oil. Sure, they're going to put some into storage. I don't know what their capacity is there, but the demand for use is definitely dropping. So their demand for use of oil, that price of oil is going to be decreasing, further biting Russian economy. But the main thing with these sanctions is that they're here to stay. Governments are doing things to remedy the effect of bad shocks to the economy. The U.S. does it, the Europe does it, but you usually engage in these types of policies to prop the economy for a very short period of time. You have an unusually high demand. You have COVID.
Mhm.
We do something, but then that shock goes away, and all of a sudden, the economy starts recovering. This is there to stay. Plus, their decision making by their government has shown that they will not prioritize regular customers, regular savers,
What
regular.
about you are concentrated on China, but what about India, Bulgaria, who are interested in Russian resources and they are ready to help Russia?
That's just nonsense, and it has to stop. Seriously, like the European countries that are trying to play some kind of political games, I think they are just missing a bigger picture. This war, it's a big one. Like, this is not a little something that's going to go away and then everybody can play their games, with the electorate every 4 years or whatever the cycle is. Same thing. I mean, same thing with India. India is not a very rich economy. It's easier for us. For me, it's very clear. India should join the global community and be on the same page with everybody else in imposing the sanctions and preventing Russia from avoiding sanctions. That's clear.
Mhm.
I do see a large country with very low incomes per capita and playing the internal politics, and it might be a little bit more difficult for them to sell it locally, and that's probably why they're reluctant to join the rest of the world.
As I know, before Russia received from the selling of oil from oil production around $200 billion a year, and now it will be cut by 50%. Do you agree with it?
Exact number is hard to guess, but it sounds like that if China and India do not join, that's probably as much
Uh-huh.
as could be achieved. Now, a big factor there is the price, right? So
Mhm.
if European Union, for example, now they set at 60. To be completely honest with you, I did not quite understand the rationale for specifically 60. Why not 40? Why not 30? And I think that that's one of the conversations that's probably, you know, because oil market is very interconnected, it's very difficult to change one thing here and not change all the prices everywhere else.
Mhm.
And I think that so I think there's probably going to be an understanding of how this effect works, because you hear experts saying that it's gonna have no effect. Like, you can set whatever you want, but we're going to be selling here at a different price, or restructure contracts, or do some kind of other ways to avoid the sanction or circumvent the price limit. But that's probably something that's going to be on the table. But the guess that I've heard that guess also. I think it's a reasonable guess that that's probably what's going to happen. But I'll be completely honest with you. We have to know that this is it's a guess, because the big one is the price of oil, and we don't know where that's going to go.
Yeah, we will see how it's going on. And also one more thing about the gas production by the end of the year, what I know will be 12% less than in 2021. So it will be the decreasing of export by 25%. So how difficult it will be for Russia to get through it?
So when we think about the big shocks like this to different, there are other economies that are in similar they're in similar situation. They depend on the exports of commodities, and when the commodity prices change, that affects their revenues. Norway, Australia is a major exporter of commodities. Canada, but when we talk about those countries, we're less concerned about those swings. And the reason for that is that those economies are capable of adapting to changes. And the reason for that is that there's a free flow of capital. If there is a need, we need to, we need to reroute some, I don't know, energy flows like what Europe is doing right now. There is money and there is capital to invest into that. Russia, unfortunately, because they're a relatively closed economy, and they don't have as big of an internal capacity to adjust to big shocks. So what I mean by that is, for example, you might say, well, if they don't have that much oil revenue, so why don't they produce highly technological products or some advanced manufacturing products? And the answer is very simple. That answer, for 30 years, they haven't been doing that.
Yes.
So if they want to do it now, they're in much worse position than they were 30 years ago. Plus, there's no inflow of foreign direct investments. Plus, there is limits on the exports of technological products to Russia, or the dual-use products to Russia. Plus, a lot of the brightest and the smartest just got up and left. Plus, a lot of the brightest and the smartest are now fighting in Ukraine. And so you basically have an economy that's being squeezed from all ends. And now they're facing this big shock that a lot of economies can easily absorb. Again, think about Australia. Sure, it's unpleasant, but, they're able to absorb. But Russia is shutting down all these channels of adjustment. So they have to take that hit fully, and essentially see the reduction in budgets, see a reduction in, expenditures and so on.
But that's a great thing you told the audience about high-tech companies and high-tech import, and also we could add to it semiconductors. The biggest problem for Russia, but still Russian officials try to find alternative. In China, in Turkey, in Kazakhstan. So. Will it work out?
They will try. They will try to do it. We can already see them trying to do it. They're trying to source their supplies from other parts. The problem is that they're essentially settling for the second-rate equipment, and if they do it, they'll try. There's very little we can do to stop. The United States and the allies will try to stop those kind of circumventing trade flows. But the thing is that those kinds of evading actions will never be zero. So in other words, think about Iran under sanctions. They were able to develop, the drones that they're selling to Russia. They were able to put them together. And so that part will not go to zero, but it'll becoming very, very difficult because, first of all, it's observed, so they have to spend effort to hide it, because very few producers around the world want to say that, oh, you know what, remember the bombs that are, falling on the Ukrainian cities and destroying infrastructure? Hey, I made it. Nobody will want to do that. So they'll have to hide. They'll have to and it's going to be unfortunately a cat and mouse game for a while. So in other words, the sanctions will probably spread on those who are evading the sanctions and trying to supply the Russian government with the equipment that they need to build those weapons, those deadly weapons. But it will never go to zero. But it will be very costly because, as I said, it's a second rate. The reason I'm saying it's second rate, by the way, this is not a statement like to put any other country down and say like, oh, this is good, this is bad. Russia, before sanctions, they had a choice where to buy their technological inputs.
Of course,
They
yeah.
chose not to buy or not to source it to the degree that they're sourcing now from, for example, China. So that means, according to them, the Chinese inputs are not as good. So do you see what I'm saying? Just by their observed behavior, we can tell that they have to switch to the second rate, in terms of, I don't know much about this, but in terms of reliability, in terms of cost, in terms of quality, in terms of, just general capabilities. And that's probably what will end up happening. They're going to be building the army that's, or building equipment that's in smaller quantities and many years behind the most advanced European and American systems.
And Alexander, how do you feel? Was Russia ready for such sanctions as have been imposed to? So, what I heard, so that Russia was ready to it military, but wasn't ready economically. What is your opinion of you?
They were absolutely not ready, because you can tell that this is a big shock. And then also another thing is that if you look at the way the Russian economy was developing before the invasion, even after the invasion of Crimea and eastern parts of eastern Ukraine, even after that invasion, they were not acting like they were trying to, for example, to develop import substitution. Developing interest. First of all, it's a horrible idea, because what you're doing, you're taking your resources and you spending them in the least efficient way. Because why you start with the question, why are you importing goods from other countries? It's because it's cheaper to do so than to produce yourself. So now you're basically saying, yeah, I know this was cheaper there, but now I'm going to start making these. And in a lot of these cases, it's actually not that easy, because you're not just saying, I was making these buying these semiconductors, I'm going to start building them. I mean, you could be years and years and billions of dollars and a lot of international expertise away from actually having that done. I don't think that's going to be effective. But the main thing is that if they were preparing for that, I don't think they did anything. At least it didn't look like it. Like there was no movement to, start producing domestic, components, high-tech components. Even now, what according to a lot of Ukrainian government information, is that they're still finding components from Western companies in the shot down Russian equipment or captured Russian equipment. So they were depending on it, and it doesn't seem like they've done a lot to overcome that. And so because of that, I'm sort of thinking that I don't think they were ready. I think they build a lot of influence in European countries.
In US, of
US
course.
too, right? That's right. And I think they counted on that to pull them through. I think it just blows my mind that they could have thought that just invading another country in the most brutal way, with the evidence from Bucha and other places, that that the world is just going to sit and look and think that, well, yeah, they contributed to my political campaign. Although we see that, right? I mean, Hungary, Bulgaria, same thing.
Yeah, I think that they thought that Ukraine and US and Europe, even all of us, were more weak in their decisions, in their behavior, and in their fight against Russia. Yeah, but recently, Alexander, Putin made a principled decision, banned the sale of oil to countries that refused to buy it. and we know that the drop of oil production will be by 700,000 barrels per day. So how do you estimate such a decrease for Russia and for ability to finance the military expenses?
I mean, it's, unfortunate. First of all, it's going to be a big effect, right? I don't understand that decision, completely honest with you. But that just also tells you about my limitation as an observer.
It's
You know,
worse
because,
for Putin than for other countries.
oh, exactly. I don't. I mean, internally, I see this bluff. I don't think there's a better way of calling it, because you're basically saying you want us to get less revenue. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get even less revenue. Like, it's, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's clear why it works, because they think that that countries are very, very dependent on a particular source of oil, and that's not quite true. Even though there is quite a bit of dependence on a particular source, because a lot of refineries are tuned to accept particular mixes of oil. So it's for a lot of refineries, it will take time to change or to be able to accept different kinds of oil. That's true. But at the same time, it's just a matter of time and cost. And if you basically say, hey, we're not going to sell you Russian oil. Well, now we need to buy oil from somewhere else. Now you change that refinery. Now you establish new routes. Now you sign long-term contracts. And now all of a sudden, Russia looks at that situation and says, look, oh no, we didn't know you would be able to switch. Now you're switching. Now we're willing to trade with you. But now those countries will not want to trade with them. So that's why I'm saying that I don't understand why they would push other countries into redirecting their purchase of oil, which has quite a bit of fixed cost. So then that decision is not easily reversible. You can't just say like, oh yeah, let's go this way. Now they built new or adjust their refineries or change their contracts. Now all of a sudden you say like, now let's go back. No, like even if everything changes and Russia pulls out their military and there's new government and whatever, and they adhere to Ukrainians' peace plan and all that, some rosy scenario down the road, even then they won't be able to go back to selling oil, because those countries will develop new relationships. Now, to your question about the military, I mean, unfortunately, I think who's going to suffer are the simple Russian citizens. Because if they are so determined to be spending money on military, that money has to go from other projects. And so if they are, because that's a political decision, right? That's not an economic decision. If I'm saying, I don't care what the numbers are, this is how much I'm spending on this one particular, category, well, all the rest has to suffer.
Yeah, and how do you feel, Alexandra, how will be changed the global oil market? So you now described that there will be a lot of frustrations, and there will be another main, as I understood, players. So how would you see it? Who would be on the first place? What will be the place of Saudi Arabia or even US and so on?
Yeah, Daria, unfortunately, I'm a little bit out of my depth here. So this is a lot of this me interpreting, but I think that, the diversification will definitely happen. That's for sure, because I think that this period of, dependency and trusting that another government is going to be doing the right thing, and they're not going to interfere, they're not going to use the fact that the countries depend on the supplies of energy. I think that's gone, and the big one is Europe and the United States. United States is fairly energy independent. They can,
Yeah.
but Europe isn't, and so I think that that's going to be a big rethinking. Saudi Arabia and other producers, Qatar for the natural gas. I mean, that's a really tough one. I think for the natural gas, I know you asked about oil, but for the natural gas, I think there's definitely going to be even further development in liquid natural gas capacity and ability to accept liquid natural gas and to export liquid natural gas. That's going to go through the roof, and what that's going to do is that will allow for substitutability, between the markets. In economics, we have this idea of a contestable markets, and those are the markets where you could observe a monopoly, or you could observe just one firm or one country dominating the market. But if the entry by others is fairly easy, then that one country or one firm is disciplined by the threat of entry. Those are the contestable markets. And so what happens here is that, what will happen in these markets is that contestability will increase. So even if now there is some country that's taking a big share of imports from another country, 5 years down the line, the ability of the country to say, you know what, we're just going to switch, that will increase, especially when it comes to liquid natural gas. And what that will do, that will affect the ability to price set or to exert any other undue influence by the exporter of the energy. And those changes are already done. Like
Yeah,
they're already done. Like
great.
that's the biggest effect of this, I think.
There are a few things I would like to discuss with you. So we know that Russia started to use the money from a welfare fund, and also it was sanctioned Russia's central bank, and there were froze around $630 billion in foreign reserves. So some economists tell it would pancake the Russian economy. The other told me, for example, on Dream of Chan, maybe you know him, he is living in London. He told me that it's now no point to think about what reserves are frozen and what they use from this welfare fund. So it doesn't matter for economic of Russia. What do you make of it? Isn't really this enough to think about that it hurts Russia or
I
not?
mean, definitely hurts. I mean, the question. So the question of that, there's a question of the degree, and then there's a question of the direction of impact. So the direction of impact is right. It hurts the economy. To understand that, it's really easy. Just ask yourself: would Russia do it voluntarily? Would Russia just say, we have this reserve fund, how about we just freeze it? Of course they wouldn't, right? That's a silly suggestion. So the fact that this is imposed on them beyond what they would have chosen, that already tells that that's, it's limiting their choices in some way. Now, how big that effect is and how immediate, that is a
Yeah.
completely different question, because unfortunately, the impact, the short-term impact might be limited precisely because of the inflow of because of the inflow of revenue from oil and gas. Because remember, those are not going to go down to zero. So those will be coming into or flowing into the economy. I mean, again, think about Iran, large country, under sanctions, limited in all kinds of different ways, but they were able to maintain the economy for quite a long time. Of course, it's not what they wanted. It's not at the level they wanted. It's creating all kinds of problems and all that. But that's their internal issues. But exactly the same thing could happen in Russia. Is that a lot of the economy will just settle into this lower path of growth or decline, and then just kind of go through it. The one thing that I think that is very difficult to predict, that makes it very difficult to make predictions, is that the economy is reacting to these sanctions, but it's based on the policies by the economists in Russia. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the one unknown is, will they be directed by the political part? Will these decisions be affected by the political changes or just directives? Same dictator saying, well, now ruble has to be stronger because of blank. That has nothing to do with any economic reasons. Will it happen? And if it happens, then all of a sudden, the whole dynamic, all the economists like me who, study, global economy, and we, by the rules of global economy, all of our suggestions would mean nothing, because they can just make a decision to do something, unilaterally, not based on anything that could have been predicted. So long story short is that I do think I think there is a cost. That cost is compounding. We see some strain already with the deficit increasing, with the ruble
Mm-hmm.
depreciating. We see those already, that they're running out of revenue, and they can't use all of their reserves to just prop the revenue. But they do have big reserves in other places, and they do have That's just, stream of revenue. And then at the same time, depreciation of the dollar is probably going to happen, because that's a sound economic response to a decrease in the demand for the products. So them propping, or ruble staying, I say just keep doing it. They're just wasting their resources for, not clear reason.
So, and the last but not the least, so what we have right now, that Russia has lost around 12% of its GDP, and it's around 5 million people who left the country. So, how will it influence the development of economy and its potential, like in a few years?
So the GDP question is very interesting because remember, Russia is recovering from a big downturn due to COVID.
Yes.
And so in other words, this war will have a compounding effect on their economy. So in other words, that a fall of GDP of that kind in the normally functioning economy is very disturbing. But at least we know, like for example, United States, right? COVID hit, GDP dropped quite a bit. Sure, it was worrisome, but we knew it was because people stayed at home and didn't spend and didn't work. As soon as the restrictions lifted, the GDP shot right back up to the growth path. So the growth path is essentially a path of GDP where, there are these fluctuations that go up and down, and then there's this path. In Russia, unfortunately, both things are happening. First is that we are on the downswing, up and down, up and down. Now it's down. But the second thing, the path of growth is trending down. Do you see? So even if they recover, they'll recover to the lower level simply because they are short 5 million people, and a lot of them are very productive members of the labor force. Because their labor force, I don't remember the exact number, but it's on the order of, I think, like 90 or something like that, 80, 90 million. So 5 million, that's a big chunk of that. Just think about what would it take to recover that amount of labor force. That's a lot of people who were trained. They went to school, they went to the universities, they have acquired experience, and now they left. So replacing these people is not going to be trivial. It's not going to be. And then the second thing is, immigration is one of the sources that often replaces, the outflow of labor force or reduction. I don't know how many people want to move to Russia now. So they don't have a natural valve where they can just say, immigration into Russia is going to help us. Not really. So my point is that I think that the relative stability of the numbers that are coming out from Russia are very misleading right now. Because if you just look at the inputs, things that are being used to produce GDP, labor, technology, information, all of that stuff is deteriorating. So by keeping it afloat, we just don't see that decline because, they want to look like nothing's happening by providing a lot of drastic measures.
And how do you feel? So how many years of development Russia lost for now, for example? So if we could say like that.
Oh, that's a tough one. I think that I would venture as saying that a lot of things that propped Russian growth and increase in the well-being of Russians in the early 2000s. I would venture saying is that they are gone forever. And when I say forever, I don't mean like forever. I mean for foreseeable future. The way they interact with the West is going to be affected for a really, really long time. So in other words, again, the same thing, technology imports, oil market revenues, all of those things will be affected for a really long time. So I think that, like in the sense, if you ask the question, at what level they are in their GDP, that's probably, we're probably talking about 5 years or something like that. But there it's very difficult to, I'm just kind of looking at the graph in my head right now. But
compared to Ukraine lose, excuse me to interrupt you, 1 year of its development.
Oh, yeah. And I think that there will be, let's not underestimate. the Russians are destroying big chunks of Ukraine. Like that's the big, like everybody has to remember that this is a completely unjustified, brutal invasion of Ukraine, where that just costs a lot, millions of livelihoods that should changed, because of the war. People having to adjust, having to move, but we see the end. We see the end. We went into this. We didn't choose this. The Ukrainians didn't choose it. The Ukrainians. The world didn't choose it. Russia imposed this war on the rest of the world, and the world surprisingly adjusted extremely well. We see a lot of good things coming out of it. We see consensus. We see Ukrainians coming out with new solutions to old problems. I think the world will come out from this stronger. Now, Russia, on the other hand, so to your question, how many years behind? So I think there is this drop. I mean, you have to be careful with these numbers, just because there's, as I said, there's also fluctuations. Like there's just the GDP goes up and down because of the business cycle. For example, Chinese COVID is affecting prices of oil. Prices of oil are affecting government revenue. Government revenue is affecting their calculation. Their government expenditure, which is the part of GDP. So something happens in China, GDP in Russia swings, and that has nothing to do with their development. It has to do with the global markets, because they're so dependent on the global demand for oil. But that's the drop. But in the long run, I think it's going to take probably several decades to get back to the same growth path that they were on. So in other words, if you look at their, just a regular kind of the path, they dropped, and they'll have to get to that path. It's very difficult to measure, because most analysts, or not most analysts, but most consumers of information, you look at the numbers and you say, well, this is a number, it was at this level, when it gets to this level, it means we're recovering. No, because there is an underlying process of growth. We call it potential GDP. And that potential GDP is growing. So you might recover, but you need to recover faster just to get to the previous growth trajectory. Now, that recovery, 30 years. This is my guess, at the very least. And the reason for that is, I'll tell you why. Because the crisis that's starting in Russia right now, it's of a very bad kind, because it's what they have is basically a stagflation situation, where the economy is tanking and they have high inflation. The reason it's bad is because typically when the economy is tanking, you can stimulate the economy by lowering the interest rate, right? And making money easy. So we say printing money. Nobody's printing money, but you basically increasing the money supply in the economy. But the problem is that the money supply increases inflation. So in other words, this channel is very difficult. And I think the Russians are understanding it right now, because they started lowering the interest rate, but then they stopped, because that creates an inflationary pressure. The problem with inflation, once you start, you can't stop it. Remember the 90s. I remember the 90s. The inflation was crazy, and people were building the expectation of inflation into their behavior. So I think that the Russian central bank is aware of that, and that's why they're trying to. It's a very difficult task. The economy is, it doesn't make sense. So the economy is slowing down and inflation is high. So the typical way to fix the economy would push the inflation even higher. So they're essentially in this very difficult situation that they have to, deep crisis, but they cannot use the typical methods of stimulating the economy. And then the second thing is, what we learned from the previous crises in the developed economies, the financial crises take really long time to recover from. And so that is that the financial crisis, they are creating the crisis of trust, the crisis of uncertainty, the crisis of basically lack of belief in the entire system of how the economy works. Russia right now, they're not going through the financial, typical financial crisis, but all the other aspects are happening. There is lack of trust. There is an unbelievable uncertainty. There is misunderstanding of how the economy is managed and what are the real goals. And so those crises take really long time to recover from.
Yeah, let me ask you a short question. So before the even ninth packet of sanctions, we heard from a lot of experts that Russian economy would struggle much more than it struggles now. Why they were so mistaken?
I think the projection. So the big one is the oil price. Short answer: oil prices stayed higher than probably was predicted. Yeah. Now that's gone because now oil prices are low and the gas prices are down. But then second, also I think the the government or the central bank of Russia reacted. So they essentially, they were just spending money to fix the situation, to make it look to make some numbers look better. And so that's one. And I think another one that's important, I think that people, I mean, not I don't want to say overlooked, but maybe important to bring up, is the COVID. Because once the economy is already growing slower, there's not a lot that it can fall. Do you see? So if you start from a lower base, there's really, when the economy was already restricted or recovering from COVID, now all of a sudden there is a second shock. It's a second shock on top of the shock. You basically have some, built-in sort of residual demand that kind of, carried the economy through. I think that's probably that high oil price reaction by the Russian central bank, and three, because we started from a lower base after COVID.
Yeah, let's put the end at this moment. Thank you, Aleksandre, for this interview. It was really fruitful, and it was really interesting to know your point of view, because I had a lot of talks with different experts, and everybody looks differently on the situation on economy.
Thank you very much. I hope my insights were useful, and Slava Ukraini.
Yeah, героям слава.